So welcome. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Amy Leschke. I am the Director of Member Services here at Minnesota DHIA. Then I will go ahead and introduce our guest speaker for the day. Brad Heins is with us. He's a professor at the University of Minnesota. He works out of the West Central Research and Outreach Center in Morris. And Brad's going to talk about a bunch of his ongoing research at the station, just recently completed and ongoing. So Brad, if you could unmute yourself, and then I will let you take it away.
Okay, thanks, Amy. Appreciate the chance to talk to you all about a little bit about different research projects that are going on here at the University of Minnesota. Most of the stuff, obviously, I'll focus on here is what's happening in Morris, but also working with a lot of different faculty from St. Paul that are involved. And if you don't know, and maybe some of you have been here before, you know, this is our dairy herd here at Morris, mostly pasture-based, dairy, crossbreds everywhere, and Holsteins as well. We have about 300 cows, a little bit less than half in an organic herd. You can see the production level there is a little bit less, high fat to protein, in our kind of low input conventional herd, milking about 160 cows. A little bit more production, a little more confined type system. And then we have different dairy breeds. We do have a registered Holstein herd here, and do all the fun classification stuff now with that, but also have about 2/3 of the herd is crossbred with various US and European breeds. So I talk a little bit about some of the ongoing research, and a few slides from a lot of different projects today, but one I've been kind of working with Minnesota DHI and was looking at fatty acids, and I have some stuff here and some in later presentation about when I talk about methane emissions. But we've been collecting data on our cows here in Morris for a few years now, looking at de novo, which are synthesized in the mammary gland. You have mixed, which are both preformed and de novo, and preformed is basically mobilized from the diet or body fat. So nutrition is what's really affecting the preformed, whereas de novo is coming from the mammary gland. So we've been collecting it. So it's a little bit hard to read, but basically this is our organic herd across time. Total fatty acids actually go down in the summertime. So, you know, the question is, what do you do with all this information that we have? And it's really from a nutrition perspective, you can use that. And I'll talk a little bit something later, but you know, our overall fatty acids go down in the summertime because of grazing. So grazing, higher forages have fatty acids that go down. They've been they start to come back up when they go into full TMR mode, at least as this is our organic herd. Our preformed fatty acids, now these are like CLAs, 18 carbon fatty acids. Those go up higher in pasture-based herds because in the summertime when they're on grass. So, you know, grazing and grass makes higher preformed fatty acids, and you can manipulate those a lot easier based on nutrition. You can see the other ones. A lot of these start to go up in the wintertime. So it's really about nutrition. You know, you kind of got a grazing herd, TMR herd in the summer. If you look at our conventional herd, fatty acids go down in the summertime. They do a little bit of grazing, but you'll notice some big changes in September and October, especially. That's when a lot of people switch to new corn silage. So you can see the big difference when you're moving into different realms of nutrition from a fatty acid perspective. In our conventional herd, you'll see this yellow line is the preformed. It doesn't change much across the time period because we're not really doing a lot of grazing, maybe a little bit in June here. But really, it comes down to nutrition, and nutrition plays a big role in manipulating the milk fatty acid concentrations. Now, I've looked at it from a breed perspective. I have a graduate student looking at all of this data, looking at the different breed comparisons, herds, and how it can be used in a sort of genetic and genomic situation. We've genotyped all of these animals so we can see if, can we select animals for different fatty acid concentrations. Probably, a big one is there are certain breed differences. If you think about it, way on the right is preformed. Our Gray's cross, which contains higher percentage of Jersey and Normandy breeds, tend to be higher than a Holstein cow. Holstein cows really are not highest for preformed fatty acids, which are the CLA 18 chain carbon fatty acids, and that's nothing new in our study that we found. That you see that in a lot of other studies. So, but you'll notice some differences. The animals with this Gray's cross, animals with higher Jersey percentage tend to have higher fatty acids and more preformed and more mixed. It's just the way it is. If you have higher Jersey percentage in your herd, you're going to have higher fatty acids. So breed is affected by a lot of this as well. And I talk to farmers about what to do with fatty acid information. One thing is you could use it for nutritional aspects, looking at changes across time. Or if you have a market that you're selling milk and you get paid more for fatty acids, then it might be worthwhile to invest in that. And consumers are certainly concerned about fatty acids in their milk, especially if you have young and growing children with omega-3s, which come into preformed fatty acids. So there is a concern from the consumers as well. So that's a little bit about fatty acids, and I'll kind of revisit that as we towards the end. One thing that I've had a graduate student, Sabrina Portner. She's Minnesotan from Sleepy Eye, grew up on a brown Swiss herd there. She looked at, was interested in looking at cull cow values of cows at the end of life. And I've been pretty interested in this as well. There is a value to those cull cows and what you might get. So this is our herd, and we've tracked a lot of stuff. So we use DART software and have been using it. I think Amy and I persuaded the powers that be in St. Paul to go to DART software back in 2010, I think. So we've been using it for a long time, and so we're able to track a lot of this information. I really use it a lot for tracking cows and all kinds of stuff. But these are reasons why cows left our herd. So this is Morris. Holstein cows, you can see death rate. We have about a 10% death rate in our herd. 9% of the cows lead for dairy purposes. We do cull 4.5% for low production. Mastitis and repro are our biggest reasons that we cull. We're a pasture-based kind of seasonal herd, so repro is the biggest reason we cull cows. And mastitis to manage for somatic cell count. If I looked within kind of cows that got culled, there's quite a few differences. We had about 14% of the Holstein cows die on farm versus about 11% of our Pro Cross, 9% of our Gray's Cross. These 1964 Holsteins that we had here, some of them die, but not very many. But you'll notice that no matter what the breed group is, repro is the -- reason for culling. Mastitis tends to be the second most reason for culling, which you find in most U.S. dairy herds today even. So we looked at cull value. So we got all of these records, knew exactly what we received for cull cow value, and we looked at it across sort of 14 years here. And you'll notice this is cull value across the year. In 2014 was a pretty good year for cull value. You know, our average price that we received was over $1,100 for all of the cows that we culled. You know, in 2020, when the pandemic started, cull cow value was pretty low, just a little over $500, but now it's starting to come back up. In 2023, we averaged over $900 for every single cull cow that left here. So it's, and sometimes cull value gets discounted, but this is real money. You know, if I can get, and actually cull value in 2024 here has been pretty good. If I can get $1,000 or more for a cull cow at the end of life, that's real dollars. So I think cull value is certain things that we really don't think about as well. And we looked at it from a breed perspective. You kind of look at this gross value here. So our 1964 Holsteins, they got just shy of $800 average. Our Holstein cows were about $723. Our other crossbreds were about $762. So we get about $40 more for our crossbred cows than we do our Holsteins for lots of various reasons, mostly related to body condition at time of culling. So it's kind of interesting to learn that what the cull value is and how we can also increase cull value. There's, you know, some beef producers, especially out here in the western part of the state, work with the packing plants where they try to put more weight on the cows to get more beef over the summertime with cull cows. So cull cows are actually a big business, and we might not think of it from a dairy perspective. So so that's kind of cull cows. One thing that we've been working on is looking at calves raised in different housing situations. So some of you know this. We've just finished a study last year where we compared a lot of calves raised individually, pair housed, group housed, and been raised on the cow. And these are sort of results of the calves that we saw, and we've been following those into lactation now. But you'll notice our individual calves, pair housed calves, and our group calves, they all gained about the same at weaning. We weaned at 9 weeks of age, so they're all 2.2 pounds per day. So they all grew well, no matter how you housed your system. So a lot of people are looking at group housing and pair housing and how those calves do. And, you know, however it works on people's farms, you can raise good calves. Calves that were raised by the dam grew a lot more because they were just drinking more milk from the cow. We had some calves that were drinking 30 to 40 pounds of milk per day from these cows. So they just gain more. But that's probably one of the big take homes is, you know, as farms move away from individual housing, you can grow good calves. Question: what percentage of the herd is 1964 and what's their production? The 1964 cows, there's about 20 milking cows right now, and their production is about 10,000 pounds a year. So quite low. It really hasn't deviated from, 1960 really when the university started the study. The contemporary cows are about right now they're in a production level at our herd. The contemporary Holsteins were about 20,000 pounds of milk. There are some 1964 genetics now in St. Paul, and the contemporary Holsteins there are 26,000. So like I said, here in Morris, our pasture-based herd's a little bit lower production. Good question though. So if we looked at these calves that were raised on the cow, really there wasn't much difference in body size as they got older. Maybe a slightly difference in some of the udder measurements or body measurements, but really all the animals grew the same as heifers, and when they calved the first time, they were all about the same size. So those calves that were raised individual, pair, and group sort of had maybe some compensatory gain to catch up with the dam raised cows. The biggest one, so we looked at what happens when you have calves raised on cows and they come into the milking parlor, well, they have some sort of behaviors more so than the other ones. So they don't enter the parlor as well. They do more stomping in the parlor. They kick the unit off more. They kick at the milkers more. So, calves that were raised on cows, I think, that's a big thing in the dairy industry right now. And um, we don't really necessarily think about what happens when they come into milk. And there are some behavioral issues this is when they first come in. This was in the first week of coming into the milking parlor. So they do have some behavioral things that, we haven't culled any of them for behavioral issues, but there's some note that can happen. Probably more noticeably kicking milkers off to start with. Oops, going the wrong way. One thing that we've also just started working with, working with DHI data. I wanted to kind of showcase that I do use a lot of DHI data in some of the research that we're using. We have a big national project. This is my part here looking at organic cows anyways, in DHI systems, and looking at benchmarking and seeing what's happening. I looked at states. So this is in the DRMS database. Minnesota's down here. We have about 12,000 organic cows. So actually quite a few. Vermont, Pennsylvania, Ohio, New York tend to have a lot more, but Minnesota has a high percentage of organic animals in the DRMS system. And we've been looking at all of these cows across the US. These are, we trying to benchmark what happens to cows, and looking at somatic cell count. But these are production levels of organic animals. You'll notice that in the Midwest and the West tends to have higher production of organic Holstein cows. Jersey organic cows tend to do well in the Midwest. Maybe crossbreds do a little bit better in the South and the West, where there's more of them. If you look at fat and protein, most of the Midwest and the Northeast tends to produce have cows that are higher in fat and protein in organic production. So it's kind of interesting. We have a great environment for grazing and pasture-based herds up here in the upper Midwest compared to the South or the West. But one thing that we're trying to help with, and I have quite a few projects working on trying to improve fertility with looking at DHI data, looking at fertility and how to improve animals with fertility. And it seems like we have, especially in these organic herds, if you look at the Holstein cows, we still have a fertility problem. This is 160 days open. That's 5 months open. That's quite a bit. In the South and the West, the days open is even higher in those Holstein herds. Some of these Jersey herds in the West, their average days open is 203 days. That's really high, and for lots of various reasons. But trying to improve fertility in these pasture-based herds is certainly one thing that we've been working with. Now, if you look at somatic cell score, this is with DHI data over time with these three breeds. It appears that somatic cell count has been creeping up in Holstein, in pasture-based Holstein, Jersey, and crossbred herds. It's still pretty low, 2.5 somatic cell score for Holsteins, but there is kind of a trend that it's been increasing, actually, when a lot of DHI herds and other data would indicate that somatic cell count has been going down. But in these pasture-based herds, it has actually been going up. And probably for some reason of farms are not necessarily organic farms are not necessarily selecting a lot for somatic cell count. They're selecting more for production. And you can see the somatic cell scores. The Northeast tends to be much lower. Actually, the Midwest and the Northeast tend to be much lower the south, where it's really hot and humid and sticky, they have somatic cell count issues, and that's we see that in DHI herds, no matter if they're organic or conventional. Somatic cell count is always higher in the south than it is in other places in the U.S. But we've been going to a lot of different farms, looking at milking parlor efficiency and how we can improve somatic cell count. So I've been putting some sensors on milking parlors and looking at cows, and this is kind of some of the interesting data that we can get. Actually, this we can tell that from this picture, this cow kicked the milker off, and the milker didn't put the unit back on for another 3.5 minutes. So the cow kicked it off, and it took them 3.5 minutes to put the unit back on. But then by that time, the cow was being over milked. So if the cow kicked the milker off, they should have actually just left the milker off. So one of the things that we're trying to figure out is, so this cow, the milking unit was on it for almost 12 minutes, and had an over milking time of about 3 minutes. So we've been looking at, how does milking parlor efficiency and milking time, and especially over milking in cows, affect somatic cell count, and how also looking at employee efficiency in milking parlors and how we can alleviate employee issues and make those more efficient for milking, and help improve somatic cell count in herds. So that's kind of one thing that we're ongoing with this, working with Florida, Colorado, New York, Ohio, trying to look at this, and we're going to a lot of herds to try and see what's going on in farms. Obviously, one of the other topics that we've been working with here at our research center is beef on dairy. It is, one of those things, and probably a lot of dairy producers are breeding that. I've actually been breeding to beef here since 2018. So almost 4 or 5 years, well, over 5 years now. I started out trying to manage heifer inventories with beef and sex semen, and then I created more heifers because I was not using enough beef. And now we are probably at 75% of our cows here in Morris are bred to beef. So we're using sex semen and all beef. And so we started with Limousine, went to Angus, and then I had a wild idea that said, I don't believe a lot what people are telling us, that Angus and all these Limousine and stuff are the breeds to use. So I set out to breed to 5 different breeds. So I got Charolais, Limousine, Angus, Simmental, and Hereford. And so we've just raised our first batch of calves with all these different breeds, and you can see they come out with lots of different color. The number is actual average daily gain at weaning, how well they are growing. So we've raised these calves here. I'd say they're pretty respectable, 1.9 on the Charolais, almost 2 on Limousine. The Angus 2.1, Simmental did well, and the Hereford actually surprised me and was had the highest average daily gain at weaning on Hereford cross calves. So I think and we're going to feed these out. We're feeding them out, and we're going to look at carcass traits and all kinds of fun stuff that goes along with that. I've sort of settled now. I haven't went back to these other breeds, but right now we're breeding most of the herd to Angus and Charolais. The Charolais are these nice beefy looking ones and do well. So I think beef on dairy is where it is. I was listening to a program on Ag Day that, the beef herd is quite small, and it's going to take a long time to get back up there. So we in the dairy industry might be able to help out with some of the beef by breeding more to beef and reducing some of our heifer numbers and heifer costs. So and Amy had talked about the beef on dairy in the herd HQ for DHIA that can give you some insights there too. So kind of the few last projects talk about methane emissions of cows. It's probably the hot topic in in the dairy world, and we've been exploring that for probably the last 6-8 months here. So we've been working with a company out of Hawaii that is producing red seaweed to feed to dairy cows to reduce methane emissions. So we've used it in our pasture-based herd. We've done it in some confined settings as well. I have this green feed machine. You can see that's these cows on pasture. This is a solar unit. So it basically, this is kind of the sort of gold standard to capturing methane emissions in cows. You know, cow gets baited with a little bit of treat. She comes in, you want her to stay in there for a couple minutes. She breathes out. You can collect methane. Our system also collects carbon dioxide, oxygen, and hydrogen on these cows. And you can capture all of the data on these cows to see what's going on. This is kind of an idea what it is. You know, you can see in real time the cow is basically eating kind of a little bit of pelleted treat and is collecting methane emission, and you can kind of see it in real time. These cows will kind of, you know, when a cow is in there, she kind of belches and releases methane at certain times. So she's not a cow is not constantly releasing methane. It comes in waves. So you can kind of see on the right or the left, you know, a cow's in there for a couple minutes. She only has 2 big methane emissions. So she's not, you know, a cow is not constantly belching methane out into the atmosphere. So we have these green feed machines, as they're called. They're out of Rapid City, South Dakota. They cost about actually $150,000, so they're very expensive to capture this methane work. So we've been working with those in our cows to see what happens. One thing I was talking about, if you look about methane, now this doesn't really tell you much. So you can, if I've compared the methane in our cows here, you'll say that, oh, the Holsteins are one of the highest breeds. So the Holsteins methane is 381 grams per day. Our Montbéliards are 400. That must mean they're bad. Well, and the Jersey sired crossbreds are the lowest for methane. That must mean they're the best. So we should just get all Jersey sired crossbreds because we'll have lower methane. Well, one of the things that usually when people start quoting about methane is they don't tell you, as I didn't tell you what the production level of these cows were. I didn't tell you how much feed intake they consume, and I didn't tell you what their production or body weight was. So if you start adding production level or dry matter intake or body weight into these equations, they all come down to about the same. You know, the Holsteins don't look so bad for methane once you incorporate dry matter intake and production into the aspect. And the Jerseys, you know, it's a smaller cow. Doesn't produce as much, so she probably produces more methane per unit of body weight than what a Holstein would. So that's one take home. If you ever hear people say, oh well, methane is bad, and we need to know a lot more aspects about the cow than just saying what her methane is. And that sort of looks at this, you know, with our cows, there's a lot of differences kind of on the top. So this top cow, she has about 300. The bottom cow is 450. So there's a wide range in methane between a lot of these different cows. So not every cow is the same for methane. That is a big issue. And actually the 3 of us, so I've been working with Isaac Sulfur and Isaac Hagen, 2 young professors at the University of Minnesota there in St. Paul. And the 3 of us have been working on this project looking at seaweed and methane emissions of cows and trying to kind of figure this out. So we started feeding this product from Hawaii. It is red seaweed. It is called Asparagopsis taxiformis is what you might hear. And we've basically mixed it into our grain mix to feed these cows to see if we could reduce methane emissions. So it comes at a pretty low level of feeding. So we're feeding about 1 ounce per cow per day. So not much at all. So the inclusion level is quite low to try and get some reduction in methane. This is sort of what methane looks like from a cow basis. You can have high. When we started feeding the seaweed, we can certainly manipulate the cow's rumen to lower methane emissions, and then when we go off, it goes back up. So really, the seaweed has helped reduce our sort of methane emissions of our cows. CO2, this is carbon dioxide. So it's across the time that we're feeding the seaweed, carbon dioxide has actually gone up. So methane might have gone down, but carbon dioxide went up. So what does that have an effect on the environment as well? And we've collected oxygen and hydrogen, and you can, these cows have different emissions that you can see based on what happening. So we can look at body maintenance and look at lots of different parameters of methane. These are all of our cows that we've been exploring for methane emissions. So what does this graph tell you? It tells you there's a lot of variation within cow. So if you look at this cow on the left, 1228, she can go from 50 grams to 600 grams in this time period. So every cow is different. Some of these cows that are 2100 to 2141, those are first lactation cows. So a first lactation cow probably has less variability in methane than some of the older cows do. So it's kind of interesting that we try and think about methane, and not every cow is the same, and there's a lot of variation within cows. Also, methane is different by time of day. So it's quite low in the morning. About the lowest point here is about 8 o'clock in the morning, and then we feed. We feed TMR to cows, so then it goes up. So once you feed, methane goes up and continues to go up throughout the day. This little dip here at about 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock, this is milking time. So methane goes down there because they're not ruminating, they're moving to the parlor and such. But then it goes back up as the cows ruminate more throughout the day. So methane tends to be highest in the evening compared to the morning time, and a lot has to do with feeding aspects. So what happens when you feed red seaweed to cows? Basically, this graph, there's a lot going on, but kind of the first few weeks, so 0 to 8, so that's kind of the adaptation period to the seaweed. We don't see much difference there. It takes a month or more for the rumen microbiology to actually adapt to the seaweed. The first day that I put cows on the seaweed, like intake was reduced by half. The cows just don't want to eat it. It's once they get used to it, then so as the time went on, methane was reduced in these cows by about 40%. 20 to 40% we can reduce methane by feeding this red seaweed. But you'll notice in the last part of the study, so out here at 25 and 26, this is 6 months after we started feeding it. Now you notice the rumen environment has started to adapt to the seaweed, and you don't find much difference between methane emissions. And that's what you find in long-term studies. As cows get fed a lot of these things, you find that the rumen environment adapts to that feed and does not lower methane emissions. So long-term effects are really difficult to find in these studies. Most of the time, people are doing studies, it's short-term, but our 6-month study really showed that you can reduce methane. It takes an adjustment period, but once you get out 6 months later, the rumen environment adjusts back and doesn't really lower methane. The body weight, so we didn't find any difference in body weight between these cows, whether they were on seaweed or not, which is good. What about production level? So these were late lactation cows that we did this in. So production level is a little bit less, right about 27 pounds of milk. they're running a little over a 4% fat, so about the same, 3.2 protein. MUN's about 11.8 and 9. We didn't really find any difference in production, which is good. We know that we when we feed these things, we don't want to lower production levels. So we didn't find any difference. So we looked at fatty acid profiles as well of these cows. Not much difference between the cows that were fed the sea graze, which is the seaweed, maybe a little bit lower preformed fatty acids. So this is the CLAs coming from, the diet. So we've manipulated the diet. So we've probably lowered the preformed fatty acids a little bit in these cows that were fed seaweed, which is kind of interesting. Basically, diet manipulation has more of an effect on fatty acids. So I tried to look at, can you predict, or what is the sort of correlation between methane emissions and these fatty acids? Well, unfortunately, it's not very good. We can't, at least in our herd, I know we're trying to do it on a national level with the data from lots of different herds, and they're trying to explore that. And some Europeans have maybe found some things, maybe not, but really there isn't much. You can't manipulate methane and total fatty acids. Actually, there, I should say the correlation is not terrible, but these are low correlations. So, as methane goes up, fatty acids go down, basically. So could you select, I don't know if we want to select for lower fatty acids, especially lower CLAs or omega-3s in our, just to get lower methane emissions, quite possibly. So there is maybe something to this, maybe not. I'm quite skeptical on trying to predict methane emissions from fatty acid profiles, but this is only based off of our herd. And I think into the future, we'll find more of that out as more of us collect this sort of data and see if there's anything there. We shall see.
Question, Brad.
Yep.
Have you seen other publications of that correlation in other studies yet?
Some in Europe. In Europe, they've been able to do some things. In the US, we haven't really tried to predict methane emissions from, spectral data, fatty acid profile data. In Europe, yes, I've seen some things like that. It certainly depends on the study. It depends on what breed. I don't know if it's perfect in Europe either, trying to predict, methane and fatty acids for a lot of various reasons, like I explained, breeds, body weights, production level. There's a lot of things that go into the equation. Good question, though. One thing that we've measured is bromide, so that, and bromoform. So that's what's in the milk that these cows, they convert basically the seaweed to bromide and iodine. And we've found that bromide is higher in the cows fed seaweed, which is what we'd expect. Iodine is a little bit, not much difference there. But the question is, can you consume milk based off of bromide? Bromide at high levels probably is not, you should not drink milk with bromide in it at very high levels. But with the results from our study, it shows that we can, an adult male or female can consume 300 ounces of milk per day with based on our bromide levels without any problems. I don't know, what is 300 ounces, 5 or 6 gallons or more of milk per day. So I don't know if anybody drinks 5 or 6 gallons of milk a day, but if you did, you probably wouldn't have too much of an issue. All over young kids, a 1-year-old baby could drink 35 ounces of milk with this level of bromide in it without an issue. And I wouldn't feed, I would not feed milk with seaweed in it to newborns because of bromide. So that's one thing that we need to look at as well, as based on consumer. So if we want to feed a lot of seaweed and a lot of these products, what's happening, and should we be feeding it to people? If you actually want to see more, you can go on YouTube. I was on US Farm Report and Ag Day back in November, where the University of Minnesota had a college road show, and I talked about feeding seaweed in cows, and they had a nice clip about our project with the US Farm Report on feeding seaweeds in our cows. And there's a lot of marketing that goes around with this, so this is what they have marketed. There's a big event in New York City in September. It's called Climate Week. Some of you may have heard of it. This was promoted at Climate Week, that you can have seaweed from Hawaii be processed. It goes to Morris, Minnesota, and is fed to our cows, and then it goes, the milk goes to New York City, and you can feed the population there. So this is was our University of Minnesota dairy herd was featured in New York City at Climate Week in September, as a way to help reduce methane emissions in cows. I was not invited to New York City. I'm far from that, but we were promoted, and that's sort of the marketing machine. Whether we had results or not, the marketing machine is strong from a climate perspective. The last few slides I'll end with here. We've also been doing some agrovoltaics work. You've probably seen a lot of solar panels going up around Minnesota, and I am not a big fan of taking good land away for solar. I think we can use them as dual use, and that's what we're trying to do here at Morris. We put cows underneath our solar panels. We also grow crops underneath them. We can, I should say, I've been doing that for 2 years. Corn and soybeans do not do as well underneath solar panels as some of the other grasses and oats and wheat. Also working with a farmer in southern Minnesota that is got some southern solar panels in his soybean field, and is looking what happens with soybeans underneath solar panels. So I think people are interested in what's happening for solar. I'm actually speaking at it. If any of you go to the Minnesota All Breeds Convention in St. Cloud in 2 weeks, I have a roundtable on Saturday morning talking about renewable energy and agrovoltaics, and how it can work on farm. This is my research technician. She did a lot of this work. We can put a lot of cows underneath solar panels without any issue. And this is kind of what it looks like. So we got lots of cows. These are dry cows and springing heifers in the fall that we've put underneath our solar system in our pasture, and they don't bother it at all. We've had no issues. So I would really like to see more livestock underneath solar panels in Minnesota than just a whole bunch of weeds. And with that, we've also been building our own portable shade system with solar. So we have a system, this kind of concept here that's being built now is we can pull around a portable solar shade system around the pasture, use it for energy. Actually, this little tractor here, this is a Monarch electric tractor. So we've acquired an electric tractor. This is from California. They use these a lot in vineyards and wine country, but we are working with the company to look at it from a perspective up here. So we have an electric tractor that we're using, so we can charge it with our portable shade system that we can use around cows. And I get a lot of funding from USDA and other entities, the lottery dollars from Minnesota, and Minnesota Rapid Ag Response Fund, which is legislative money to make all this stuff that I do work. So this is sort of, I use, a lot of people use AI and Chat GPT. So this is what I said, give me a picture of our cows at Morris eating seaweed underneath solar panels, and voila, this is what the AI throws out. So could this be the future? Who knows? But this is a lot of the things that we're doing. So thanks for listening today, and hopefully you've been enlightened on a few of the projects that we're doing here at the University of Minnesota. Thanks.
Thank you, Brad. That was a lot of information and covering a wide variety of topics. Any questions for Brad here? I'm not seeing anything in the chat, so we will continue on. Thank you again, Brad.
Just some quick lab updates. What Brad is talking about, some of that. They're starting to look at spectra data. We're not going to get into a lot of details about spectra data because not everyone understands it. I don't understand it all yet. It's just basically we're looking at basically, if we want to make it simple, a graph that happens from the sample that's being tested. And there's little bumps and peaks and whatever along this graph. And this is where they're looking at some of these things, maybe methane, maybe who knows what in the future here. And Brad, question for you, have you been looking at the spectra data?
I have been, yes, to see
Okay.
what I can find.
What program do you use to look at it?
I use R. It's a statistical program, yeah.
What was that?
Oh, it's called R. It's a statistical program, yeah.
Okay. Because people, because Brad had asked us some questions about it, and we can't even look at the spectra data ourselves. So we would have to get a program in order to look at the spectra data. And then Dr. Barbena was going to go through some basics of the spectra data with us as well. So we're going to get educated. We're still going to we're going to continue to research the staph gold ELISA test. We're currently working with Bentley and Dr. Barbena with the fatty acids on the Bentley instruments. They're trying to mimic what happens with our Delta instruments onto the Bentley instruments. Research other ELISA tests. Is there an ELISA test for A2 milk? Maybe. We also have 2 new meter center technicians. Steven Sievert is going to be here tomorrow to do an audit with Christy Coleman and McKenna Kenyon. And after that, they should be able to start calibrating meters. We talk a lot about milk. I'm going to talk about manure a little bit, which we hardly ever talk about. So this is just a pie chart of this past year and the amount of samples per month. So you can see, we start out here in January, February, March, April, we get a little blip. May goes up, we get a blip in the spring, then things fall off. And then September, more or less, things start ramping up, October, November, December. One of the biggest things we found out the last 2 years is with the new manure management plan they put in place, you're not supposed to apply manure before October 15th if the ground is over 50 or 55 degrees. So what we've seen is a lot of these manure applicators might be applying, but they're not sending in their samples. So they're holding them. And so after October 15th, the samples started flying in here. And they start coming, so they get a stamp from us, a date that it was from us is after October 15th, even though that sample might have been pulled ahead of time. Whatever, we make it work. But so what happens to us is we get backed up, and they're all okay with it because they don't start looking at things until the end of December anyway, because they're busy. But this just goes to show you the volume that comes in. And here's a little more information on, everybody always asks us, what do we get in here? Well, about 59% of our samples are swine, 22% is dairy, 8% beef, 9% poultry. And miscellaneous is stuff that we have no clue what it is, so we don't put anything down. We can smell it, look at it. It's like, we don't know what it is, and they don't mark it. So then it goes under miscellaneous. And so we did 8,413 manure samples in 2023. That's the most since 2019, the second most since 2015. So overall is a pretty good year. And then we did 4,990 samples from October through December. That's 59% of the yearly samples in 3 months. So it gets a little crazy in the fall. It kind of follows that people who do soil testing, it's kind of that same thing. Fall is nuts. It just is. And then just to touch on ELISA numbers, we did 52,278 preg samples this past year. Yoni's 19,000 98, and leukosis 2,382. Preg and Ionis were both down. Leukosis was up. I don't know if everybody remembers last winter, there was an article about leukosis in hordes, and that led to a number of people doing some leukosis testing. Well, as you can see at the end of the year, it's fallen off. So I don't know, some people had a lot of positive animals, and I think then it was kind of this now what? But we are back to where we were pretty much the year before, with the numbers have gone down with leukosis testing as well. So that's all I wanted to share today. Anybody have any questions?
I don't see anything in the chat here either, Mark. So thanks for coming on and for presenting those.
You're welcome.
So with that, I think I will end our meeting. So thank you guys for attending and have a wonderful day.